Johnny Carson, a name forever etched in the history of American television. For over 3 decades, he sat in the host's chair on The Tonight Show, turning it into a golden launch pad for hundreds of artists. Just being invited as a guest could change a singer or actor's life overnight. But behind the spotlight, a harsh truth slowly emerged. Carson's guest list was almost spotless of black artists. Statistics show that throughout his reign on air, the number of black artists invited could be counted on one hand. Sammy Davis Jr., the famous member of the Rat Pack, was one of the few who appeared multiple times. Yet, many industry colleagues whispered that he was Carson's black shield. Those hugs, those on-air kisses that looked like history in the making, were really just a staged performance to prove Carson wasn't racist. As for Richard Pryor, the most prominent black comedian of the 1970s, he rarely got a chance. Each time he was invited, his sharp satirical bits on racial discrimination were edited out, diluting the very personality that had propelled him to the top. Eddie Murphy only appeared in the late 1980s, when the press relentlessly criticized the show for no longer reflecting a changing society. But beyond those 3 faces, there was almost no one else. Legendary black stars like Nina Simone, Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin repeatedly expressed their desire to sit in the guest chair. Yet, the door to The Tonight Show under Carson's era remained firmly shut. An internal NBC document even clearly stated Carson himself crossed Nina Simone off the guest list in 1965 with just 2 words: too political. That action didn't just reject one artist, it silenced the voice of resistance against injustice for an entire generation. Critics once remarked bitterly, every time Carson shook hands with a black artist on air, audiences breathed a sigh of relief, thinking America was fair. But the truth is, that door only cracked open a little, then slammed shut right after. Carson was called America's best friend. But the power in his hands didn't just create legends. It also stripped opportunities from countless black talents, turning their dreams into a door locked forever. And if Johnny Carson leaves us bitter with his silent exclusion, the next star goes much further. He didn't just stay silent or hide. He openly declared his belief in white supremacy to the world. That man is John Wayne, the Duke, the immortal icon of America's Wild West. He rode horses through the desert, and with just a steely gaze and a gun at his hip, audiences believed they were seeing a hero defending justice. Time magazine even ranked Wayne among the 100 most influential cultural icons of the 20th century. Yet behind that wide-brimmed hat and unbreakable image was a belief that made the world shudder. John Wayne didn't hide it. He saw white supremacy as an obvious truth. In 1971, in a lengthy Playboy interview, Wayne bluntly stated, "I believe in white supremacy until blacks are educated to the point where they are responsible." That wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was printed verbatim, spreading across America and shocking millions of readers. But it wasn't just words. Throughout his career, Wayne stuck to films that portrayed Native Americans as savages, Mexicans as thieves, and nearly erased black presence from the screen altogether. That wasn't coincidence. It was a deliberate choice to protect white cinema. When asked about white people taking land from Native Americans, Wayne coldly replied, "It was just survival. The natives were selfish for holding onto so much land for themselves." Historians say that response turned Wayne into a symbol of the most ruthless distortion of American history. He didn't stop at people of color. Wayne openly opposed the women's rights movement and called gay characters on screen a perverted lifestyle. Colleagues recounted that behind the scenes, he even tried to stop director Stanley Kramer from inviting black artist and activist Paul Robeson to a major project, because Wayne didn't want radical blacks to have a place in Hollywood. Even as American society erupted in the civil rights movement, John Wayne's image dominated the silver screen. He won an Oscar for True Grit in 1969, had statues built in his honor, and even after his death in 1979, his name was etched on the International Airport in Orange County, California. A bitter paradox. While thousands of people of color shed blood for equality, this country still celebrated a man who openly worshipped white supremacy as a national hero. If Johnny Carson was the silent gatekeeper blocking opportunities, then John Wayne was the bold voice proclaiming discrimination as a way of life. And after him, this list doesn't stop, because the next one is Hollywood's gentleman, Clark Gable, a face everyone thought was perfect, but the truth is completely the opposite. Clark Gable, the man once dubbed the King of Hollywood, audiences remember him as the elegant gentleman, impeccably tailored suit, captivating smile, and confident demeanor in Gone with the Wind. He was the dream of millions of women, the standard of elegance on the silver screen. But behind that light was a darkness hard to forgive. In his private life, Clark Gable had a habit of using the N-word, one of the most poisonous words in American history, a symbol of contempt for black people. What shocked the public even more was his relationship with Hattie McDaniel, the first black actress in history to win an Oscar, from the very film Gone with the Wind. The public once thought Gable protected her when he opposed barring Hattie from the awards ceremony room, but after that historic curtain, Hattie confessed that Gable had called her the N-word multiple times in private conversations, not just Hattie McDaniel. Many crew memoirs reveal that Gable often mocked black extras, imitating their speech and gestures to amuse his friends. Once on the set in 1939, his insults were so harsh that the entire room fell silent, but no one dared speak up. Contemporary press also noted the paradox. On the covers, Clark Gable was portrayed as fair, even opposing segregated bathrooms on set, but at private Beverly Hills parties, he freely spewed mockery, turning black people into entertainment. Film researchers like Donald Bogle have noted, coming from America's Midwest, Gable grew up in an environment where racist language was everyday habit. But instead of changing, Hollywood gave him the chance to keep that habit and turned it into his personal signature. The result? The elegant gentleman image audiences once admired turned out to be a thin shell. Beneath it, Clark Gable was a two-faced man using words to perpetuate the racial divide. This truth hurts even more when compared one of Hollywood's kings, who made the world swoon with his suave charm, routinely sowed humiliating words toward the very people sharing the set with him. And if Gable disappoints us with his hypocritical deceit, the next name, James Stewart, will weigh even heavier on our hearts. He once made all of America tear up with It's a Wonderful Life, became the symbol of the brave citizen in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Stewart was called America's good man, the good man of America. Yet, behind the screen, the truth was ruthless. Stewart repeatedly revealed contempt, even directly insulting his black colleagues. In 1962, while filming The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, an incident shocked the entire crew. Black actor Woody Strode recalled, in the middle of shooting, Stewart suddenly unleashed derogatory words. The set went dead silent. Director John Ford, known for being strict and hot-tempered, had to intervene immediately to prevent an explosion right in front of everyone. For Strode, it was a lifelong humiliation, but the story didn't end there. In the early 1970s, Stewart was already an icon, even with his own sitcom on American TV. In this show, a young black actor was cast in an important advisor role. Just a few episodes later, the character vanished completely, as if he never existed. Crew members confirmed that Stewart vehemently opposed it, refusing to accept a black person teaching his character in front of millions of viewers. Behind those actions was Stewart's growing closeness to J. Edgar Hoover, the notoriously conservative FBI director, famous for opposing the civil rights movement. To Hoover, anyone fighting for equality was labeled a communist. Stewart, as America's symbol, unwittingly became a silent ally, aiding the campaign to halt change. What heartbroken the public most was the hypocrisy. On screen, James Stewart was ready to sacrifice everything to protect the weak. But off-screen, he used his power to erase opportunities, pushing black colleagues out of the slightly open door. As this truth gradually came to light, the image of the good man that all of America once trusted collapsed. It revealed a bitter paradox. Even the most celebrated, most shining faces can hide unacceptable shadows. The next one is Gary Cooper, the image of the simple, upright American hero. With calm eyes and a tall, sturdy build, he conquered audiences with high noon. Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, becoming the symbol of integrity and righteousness on the silver screen. People believed Cooper embodied straightforwardness, a quiet hero of America. But after that shining shell was a dark obsession. Cooper harbored a deep hatred for the Jewish community, and he didn't hide it in private conversations. Colleagues recounted that at Beverly Hills parties, Cooper would lower his voice, then coldly drop bitter words. Hollywood is being manipulated by Jews. To him, Jewish writers and directors were just puppet masters behind the studios, and Hollywood could only keep its American identity by removing them. Those words didn't just sow doubt. They helped create a stifling atmosphere of fear in the artist community during the 1940s and 50s. Writers like Ben Hecht and Clifford Odets admitted they lived in constant anxiety as such prejudices spread. Cooper didn't stop at words. When the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, held hearings, Cooper voluntarily testified as a witness. He didn't directly name anyone, but just the presence of the national hero was enough to legitimize the witch hunt, putting hundreds of artists, mostly Jewish or civil rights supporters, on blacklists, losing jobs, even forced to leave America. The most bitter part, Cooper's own private life was full of contradictions. While publicly anti-Semitic, he was rumored to have a long romantic relationship with actor Randolph Scott. The two lived together in a Malibu beach house, scrutinized by the press until Paramount intervened to cover it up. A man who knew the fear of judgment should have empathized with marginalized communities. But Cooper chose the conservative side, turning his own insecurities into weapons against others. Critic Richard Schickel once said, Gary Cooper didn't just play upright roles. He used those roles as a shield to hide his most ruthless prejudices. A too-bitter paradox. On film, Cooper was ready to sacrifice to save an entire town. But off-screen, he made hundreds of artists live in fear just because they were different. And then, while the public was still reeling from the truth about Gary Cooper, Hollywood witnessed another shock. The woman once praised as a beauty icon, the goddess on the silver screen, Vivien Leigh, the proud, haughty Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. At the 1939 Atlanta premiere, thousands crowded just to glimpse her sparkling green eyes and regal posture. On screen, Leigh was the embodiment of timeless allure, but off-screen, she carried heavy prejudices, just like her character Scarlett from the old American South. During filming, many witnesses recounted that Vivien Leigh frequently spewed insults at black actors. To her, they were just background shadows dressed as servants, kneeling on the edges of the frame. Once, Leigh refused to enter the makeup room because she saw black extras there, demanding her assistant clean it before she appeared. This wasn't just the whim of a diva star, it reflected a deep contempt embedded in her psyche. When Gone with the Wind faced fierce post-war criticism for romanticizing slavery, journalists asked the stars to speak out. Clark Gable at least opposed segregated bathrooms on set. As for Vivien Leigh, she chose silence. No apology, no statement, just absolute coldness. A British journalist once wrote in his diary when replaying a scene of a black servant kneeling to pick up Scarlett's skirt. Vivien Leigh laughed, then turned with a bitter remark, "They only look natural in their proper place." Though whispered, it became an indelible stain in the memory of witnesses. Leigh's radiant beauty and alluring eyes once made audiences overlook everything else. But behind that splendor was a sad truth. Vivien Leigh didn't just play Scarlett O'Hara on screen. She lived as Scarlett in real life. A Scarlett who saw black people as subordinates. A Scarlett who never wanted to face the truth of injustice. When the public began to realize this truth, Hollywood was shaken once more. Because after Vivien Leigh came another star, Katharine Hepburn, the name tied to the image of strength, independence, breaking every barrier for women in Hollywood. She wore pants when society still saw it as taboo, played women who dared to love, live, and challenge prejudices. Hepburn was hailed as the goddess of freedom on the silver screen, but after the light of a feminist icon hid a grim truth. After the Pearl Harbor tragedy in 1941, Hepburn turned America's pain and anger into a deep pit of hatred for the Japanese, and she never escaped that pit. In a conversation at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Hepburn declared bluntly, "I cannot and will not work with anyone of Japanese blood." That statement immediately hit major newspapers, making her one of the fiercest voices in the widespread anti-Japanese wave across America. Not just words. Hepburn once refused a Broadway role because the cast included a few Japanese Americans. They were born and raised in California, with no ties to the Japanese military, but in Hepburn's eyes, they were still potential threats. Her influence extended to sets. Scripts with Japanese characters were often forced to change them into spies, villains, or faded shadows. A bitter screenwriter recalled, "Pressure from Hepburn buried an entire community of artists, pushing them into humiliating roles." What's bitter here? Hepburn herself, praised for breaking gender chains, helped build a racial wall. She could wear pants to prove women had rights, like men. But when facing the Japanese, the freedom in her eyes vanished instantly. Decades later, as the civil rights movement rose, many other stars spoke for reconciliation, trying to heal past wounds. But Katharine Hepburn, she chose silence, a silence strong enough to affirm that hatred wasn't just a wartime reaction, it was a scar etched into her career and soul. That's the sour paradox of Hollywood. A freedom goddess, a symbol of breaking molds, also helped reinforce vicious stereotypes. And if Hepburn disappoints the public with her blatant contradictions, the next name shocks even more. Marlon Brando, one of the greatest talents Hollywood ever produced. He once stunned the world by refusing the Oscar for The Godfather in 1973. Instead, Brando sent Native American actress Sachin Littlefeather to the stage to read a speech denouncing Hollywood's distortion of Native American images. That moment instantly became legend. The public hailed him as a justice warrior, daring to challenge the system. Yet, after that glow, another truth slowly emerged. Brando's longtime lover, actress Rita Moreno, revealed that at private parties in his Mulholland Drive home, Brando often imitated black speech to amuse guests. Not only that, he repeatedly dropped shocking lines. "I would never trust blacks in my own home." Close friends recounted that Brando also frequently mocked Asians and Latinos. To him, spewing insults was sometimes like adding spice to a joke. A New York Post reporter once noted in his journal, "Brando has two faces, one fighting for justice in public and one spewing bitter prejudices at booze-fueled parties." This contradiction grew even more bitter when set against Brando's public actions. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr., joined the 1963 March on Washington. He was praised as the artist of the civil rights movement, but behind the scenes, many black colleagues admitted Brando never invited them into his private circle, even avoiding long-term collaborations on film projects. The Guardian once called Brando a monument to contradiction, a man who left a brilliant legacy and indelible stains. To the public, he was a genius, a great rebel, but to those who heard his slurs, Brando was just a two-faced man, using the language of justice to build his personal myth. And that's the painful truth. Brando turned the civil rights movement into part of the rebel image he wanted to carve for himself. Justice, in his hands, was both a weapon and a mask. The next one is Bing Crosby, the name that echoes in millions of American homes every winter. White Christmas became the best-selling recording of all time, turning Crosby into a symbol of joyful reunions, family warmth. On the radio, his voice was like the breath of the holiday season, gentle, comforting. People called him the voice of Christmas. Yet, behind the doors of his Holmby Hills mansion, a completely opposite truth unfolded. Gary Crosby, his eldest son, revealed in his memoir, family dinners often started with a performance that made the kids shudder. The father America saw as Santa Claus mimicked black voices, Latino accents, and tossed in mean jokes about Jews. The table erupted in loud laughter, but for the children it was underlying fear, not just words. Crosby turned contempt into an unspoken rule in life. He was a longtime member of elite California clubs, with unwritten rules: no blacks, no Jews. Many artists of the era chose to protest, leaving those groups. But Crosby stayed silent, raising his glass as if it were the natural privilege of status. More painful, Crosby unleashed all those biases on his own family. Gary recalled he was frequently beaten, berated, blood staining the floor. For Bing Crosby, proving superior power seemed more important than fatherly love. The result? The children grew up in fear, believing differences in skin color or background meant humiliation. The public saw a kindly priest in going my way. But in the real home, Crosby became a tyrant, sowing coldness instead of warmth. The voice of Christmas, instead of bringing peace, became a veil for a soul stained with prejudices. If Bing Crosby makes us see the contrast between public image and private life, the next figure, Charlie Chaplin, a name that transcended cinema borders, becoming a global icon. The image of the little tramp with his cane and mustache once made the world laugh, then cry. Chaplin was hailed as the voice of the poor, the downtrodden, humanity's conscience in chaotic times. But behind those expressive eyes and humanitarian films was a real life overflowing with contradictions and shadows. Chaplin repeatedly shocked the public with his scandalous private life. He married Mildred Harris at age 16, then abandoned her when she got pregnant. He wed Lita Gray at 16 while he was 35, and the marriage ended in a noisy divorce filled with accusations of control, confinement, and mental abuse. With Paulette Goddard, Chaplin remained domineering, seeing women as mere shadows beside him. Even with Una O'Neill, when she was 18 and he 54, Chaplin once again turned love into an imbalanced power dynamic. This wasn't just failed marriages, it was a repeating pattern, showing Chaplin always chose girls too young to easily dominate and control. On screen, he made the world weep for the little guy crushed by society. But off-screen, he himself played the strong man, turning the women around him into victims. That hypocrisy makes Chaplin's legacy full of paradoxes. On one hand, he was a creative genius, bringing laughter to all humanity. On the other, he invoked love to control, talent to justify tyranny. And the truth becomes even harder to accept when we remember Chaplin was once praised as the voice of human rights, a symbol against oppression. Yet he recreated that oppression in his own life. Only this time, the victims weren't the poor on screen, but young, vulnerable women who bonded with him. If Charlie Chaplin leaves us stunned by the gap between art and real life, the final figure in this list causes an even greater aftershock. Walt Disney, a name that, just mentioning it, makes people think of Mickey Mouse, Snow White, or fireworks-lit parks. He was called the father of childhood, bringing magic to millions of kids worldwide. Disney's legacy still stands tall, hailed as an immortal monument. But when that glittering curtain is lifted, people discover it's not just magic inside. There are shadows that shock the public. Many colleagues revealed Disney had close ties to the German-American Bund, a pro-Nazi group operating in America. They saw him casually shaking hands, chatting with open Hitler admirers. More seriously, just weeks after the 1938 Kristallnacht tragedy, when thousands of Jews were arrested and synagogues burned, Walt Disney opened his Burbank studio to host Leni Riefenstahl, Hitler's infamous propaganda director. That act was called by European press a slap to humanity's pain, not just social ties. Prejudices seeped into his works. Dumbo in 1941 depicted a flock of crows in a ridiculous tone, becoming a caricature of black people. Song of the South in 1946 was even more outrageous. It painted a sweet South where black slaves sang happily under white masters. Disney called it a Southern fairy tale. But to millions, it was a wound turned into entertainment. Behind the scenes, many colleagues also recounted Disney mocking Jews, showing disdain for Mexican-origin collaborators or anyone non-white. He joined elite clubs with unspoken rules, no blacks, no Jews, and chose silence, seeing it as status privilege. What makes this truth scarier is that Disney knew how to wrap all those prejudices into products for children, the most innocent, most impressionable audience. When a child sings along to a character's song, they don't know they're absorbing a world molded by discrimination. A cultural researcher once remarked, Disney didn't just sell dreams. He sold a world where prejudices were cloaked in magic. And today, amid fireworks and grand castles, the name Walt Disney is still celebrated. But for many, it's forever tied to a painful paradox, a symbol of childhood happiness, also an enabler and spreader of prejudice's shadows. We've just journeyed together through a shocking path, from Johnny Carson, John Wayne, Clark Gable, to Walt Disney. Names once praised as legends, models of justice and humanity. But when the halo falls, we see the truth. Vicious prejudices, words and actions that left indelible stains in history. Hollywood once built shining monuments, but behind the velvet curtain, not a few of those monuments stood on foundations of injustice and discrimination. And perhaps the biggest lesson we take today is don't let the silver screen's light obscure the real truth about the people off screen. So, what do you think? In this list of 10 stars, who shocks you the most? Are there other names you'd like me to explore in future videos? Leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss together. Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video so you won't miss other shocking stories hidden behind Hollywood's glow. See you in the next video.